She walked up to the most feared horse on the ranch, under the scornful gaze of everyone. But a single gesture revealed secrets no one could have imagined. Elena Ramirez woke before the sun, as she always did. The thin aluminum walls of the trailer amplified every sound: her aunt's soft snoring from the other room, the distant howl of coyotes retreating into the hills, the whisper of wind through the mesquite trees. She sat up on her narrow cot, her body already accustomed to rising at 4:30 in the morning, no alarm necessary. She moved quietly, taking care not to wake Tia Lupita, who wouldn't start her housekeeping shift at the Desert Palms Motel until 9. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she pulled on worn jeans and a faded blue work shirt. In the cramped bathroom, Elena splashed cold water on her face, avoiding her reflection in the cracked mirror. She braided her long black hair with practiced fingers, then twisted it into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. Invisible, practical, forgettable, just as she needed to be. Outside, the Arizona desert lay silver blue in pre-dawn light. Elena breathed in the cool air, knowing the September heat would be merciless by midday. She grabbed her battered backpack and began the mile-long walk to Diamond Creek Ranch, her shadow stretching before her on the dusty road. The ranch's silhouette rose in the distance, sprawling white buildings, manicured lawns, and tall wrought iron gates that separated the world of wealth from everything else. Elena slipped through the service entrance at the back of the property, nodding to Manuel, the elderly stable manager who pretended not to notice she arrived 30 minutes before her official start time. "Buenos dias, muchacha," he said softly, sliding her a paper cup of coffee from his thermos. "Gracias, Manuel." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her hands on the cup. Before anyone else arrived, Elna had her morning ritual. She moved silently through the row of stables, stopping at specific stalls. The first held an aging quarter horse with arthritis that the wealthy teenage girls no longer wanted to ride. The second contained a high-strung Arabian who had thrown his rider last month and was now considered difficult. "Good morning, Estrella," she whispered to the Arabian mare, reaching into her pocket for a sliced apple she'd saved from yesterday's lunch. The horse's ears pricked forward, and she approached the stall door cautiously, nostrils flaring. "Easy, beautiful girl." Elena held the apple flat on her palm, her voice a gentle stream of Spanish. "No one understands you, do they? You're not mean, you're scared. There's a difference." The mare, who had bitten 2 handlers last week, delicately took the apple from Elena's hand. As the horse chewed, Elena reached up slowly and stroked her sleek neck, continuing to murmur soothingly in Spanish. The sky was lightening when Elena finally began her official duties, mucking stalls, hauling feed, scrubbing water troughs. She kept her head down when the first trainers arrived, when the wealthy owners came to check on their investments, when the young riders showed up for their morning lessons. She was invisible to them, just another Mexican worker, indistinguishable from the gardeners and the kitchen staff. During her lunch break, Elena sat alone behind the feed barn, pulling out her worn notebook. On the first page, written in careful block letters, Universidad de Medicina Veterinaria. She flipped through pages of notes she'd taken while observing the ranch veterinarian, sketches of horse anatomy, lists of medical terms she'd looked up at the public library. She counted the money in the small envelope tucked into the back cover, $273 saved over 6 months, a pitiful sum against the mountain of tuition she would need. A memory surfaced unbidden, crossing the desert at 12 years old, her mother's hand clasped tightly in hers. The unforgiving sun, the empty water bottles, her mother's increasingly labored breathing. "Elena, mi cielo," her mother had whispered on that final day, her cracked lips barely moving. "Promise me you'll become something beautiful." The sound of approaching trucks pulled Elena from her reverie. She quickly packed away her notebook and returned to work, positioning herself near the main stables where she could observe without being noticed. A caravan of sleek black SUVs rolled through the main gates, followed by a massive pickup truck towing a custom horse trailer. The vehicles bore Texas license plates and the insignia of Montgomery Oil emblazoned on their doors. Elena recognized the name, Harrison Montgomery, the Texas petroleum magnate who had purchased Diamond Creek Ranch 3 months ago but hadn't yet visited the property. The staff assembled quickly as a tall man in his 50s emerged from the lead vehicle. Harrison Montgomery wore a custom-tailored suit despite the desert heat, his silver hair perfectly styled, his tan artificial. He surveyed the property with the cold calculation of someone assessing an investment rather than a home. "Bring him out," Montgomery commanded, gesturing toward the trailer. 2 ranch hands approached the trailer cautiously. They were joined by Buck Thornton, the ranch's head trainer, a weathered man with cold eyes who wore his cruelty like a badge of honor. Buck barked orders as the men prepared to unload whatever precious cargo the trailer contained. Elena edged closer, pretending to sweep the stable entrance. When the trailer doors opened, she could hear the sounds of struggle from within, powerful hooves striking metal, an angry whinny that raised goosebumps on her arms. 4 cowboys emerged, each holding a separate rope attached to a magnificent black horse who fought against their restraint with every step. The Mustang was the most beautiful animal Elena had ever seen, coal black from nose to tail, with a coat that gleamed like obsidian in the morning light. He stood nearly 17 hands high, his muscles rippling beneath his hide as he fought the restraints. But it was his eyes that captured Elena, dark, wild, filled with a fury born of terror and defiance. "This," Montgomery announced to the assembled staff, "is the last truly wild Mustang of the West, captured in the federal lands of Nevada just 3 weeks ago." He smiled with the satisfaction of a man displaying a trophy. In 30 days, he'll either be broken or slaughtered. Elena felt her heart constrict. The Mustang reared suddenly, pulling 2 handlers off their feet. Buck Thornton responded with a sharp jerk on the lead rope that made the horse's head snap back unnaturally. "He's already injured 3 professional trainers," Montgomery continued, undisturbed by the display of violence. "Cost me a small fortune at auction, but when my son rides him in the Prescott Rodeo next month, everyone will know the Montgomery name in Arizona." "Get him to the isolation stall," Buck ordered. "Heavy chains, double-locked gate." Elena watched in horror as the Mustang was forced across the yard toward a reinforced stall at the far end of the property. The horse fought every step, eyes rolling wildly, sweat already darkening his black coat. When one handler hesitated, Buck grabbed a whip from a nearby post and cracked it inches from the Mustang's hindquarters. The animal lunged forward in terror, crashing into the metal bars of the stall. "What's his name?" someone asked. "Fury," Montgomery replied with a thin smile. "Fitting, isn't it?" Throughout the day, Elena found excuses to pass by Fury's isolated stall. The Mustang paced relentlessly, charging at the bars whenever anyone approached. By afternoon, his shoulders were raw from repeatedly striking the walls, small streaks of blood visible on his ebony coat. As she watched the magnificent animal's desperation, Elena felt something stir inside her, a recognition. She had seen that same wild terror once before, in her own reflection as she and her mother were abandoned by coyotes in the middle of the desert. That same desperation when she held her mother's hand as she drew her final breath, leaving 12-year-old Elena alone in a foreign country. When night fell and the ranch grew quiet, Elena slipped out of her aunt's trailer. The walk back to Diamond Creek felt different in darkness, more dangerous, but also more honest. The desert revealed its true nature at night, just as people did when they thought no one was watching. Elena moved silently across the property, avoiding the security lights. She carried nothing but a small flashlight, which she kept off until she reached the isolation barn. Inside, she could hear Fury still moving restlessly, his hooves striking the concrete floor with dull thuds. She slid the barn door open just enough to slip inside, then closed it behind her. The interior was dark except for a single security light that cast long shadows across the floor. Fury's stall was at the far end, separated from the others by an empty space on either side. The Mustang sensed her immediately. He snorted loudly, pawing at the ground, then charged the stall door with such force that Elena took an involuntary step backward. The horse's eyes reflected the dim light, wild and distrustful. Elena sat down on a hay bale several feet from the stall, making no move to approach. Fury paced, occasionally striking the walls with his shoulders, his breathing heavy and distressed. "I know," Elena said softly in Spanish. "They took everything from you too." The Mustang paused briefly at the sound of her voice, then resumed his agitated pacing. Elena began to sing, her voice barely above a whisper. "A la puerta del cielo venden zapatos." It was the lullaby her mother had sung during thunderstorms, during the long nights in the detention center, during their journey through the desert. She sang it now not to tame the wild horse, but because it was the only comfort she had ever known how to give. For nearly an hour, Elena simply sat and sang, one song blending into another, her voice growing more confident in the darkness. She made no attempt to approach Fury, asked nothing of him. She simply existed in the same space, offering the gift of her presence without demand. When she finally stood to leave, her legs stiff from sitting on the hard bale, Elena noticed that Fury had stopped striking the walls. He stood at the back of his stall, still alert, still wary, but no longer throwing himself against the barriers in panic. "Hasta mañana," she whispered, moving slowly toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Elena glanced back one last time. In the dim light, her eyes met Fury's across the shadowed barn. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, an understanding that transcended words. The Mustang's gaze held none of the blind panic it had shown all day, but instead a focused intensity that seemed to look through her rather than at her. When Elena slipped out into the night, she carried that gaze with her. Two wounded beings recognizing each other in the dark, separated by iron bars but connected by something that no fence could contain. Elena couldn't shake Fury's gaze from her mind as she walked back to her aunt's trailer under the star-filled Arizona sky. That look, recognition amid fear, haunted her in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if the Mustang had seen through her carefully constructed invisibility, recognizing something in her that others missed. Or perhaps she was imagining connection where there was only animal instinct. Either way, she knew she would return. The next day dawned hot and clear. Elena arrived at Diamond Creek Ranch earlier than usual, positioning herself behind a stack of hay bales where she could observe Buck Thornton and his men approaching Fury's isolation stall. 4 cowboys flanked Buck, each carrying a lasso and wearing chaps. Their faces were grim with determination. "This one's got spirit," Buck announced, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "But every spirit can be broken. It's just a matter of force." Elena watched in silent horror as they entered the small corral adjacent to Fury's stall. When they opened the stall door, the Mustang burst out like black lightning, immediately searching for escape. Finding none, he circled the perimeter, nostrils flared, eyes wild. Buck cracked his whip near Fury's hindquarters, driving the horse toward the center. "Gotta remind him who's boss," he called to the others. "These wild ones think they're special. They ain't." The men closed in with their lassos. Fury reared, front hooves slashing the air. One rope caught his neck, then another. The Mustang fought with such intensity that 2 handlers were dragged several feet before regaining their footing. Buck approached with a saddle. Fury's response was immediate. He bucked violently, eyes rolling white with terror. "He's never gonna submit if you keep scaring him," Elena whispered to herself, hands clenched into fists. After an hour of struggle that left both men and horse sweating and bloody, Buck called an end to the session. "Lock him up, no water till noon. Start weakening his resolve." When they finally left, Elena could see Fury trembling in his stall, foam flecking his coal-black coat. Something twisted in her chest. She recognized the strategy. It was the same one the Border Patrol had used during her crossing, withholding water until desperation set in. Breaking the body to break the spirit. That evening, Elena counted her meager savings by the dim light of her bedside lamp. $175 saved over 3 months, money that should be going toward her veterinary school dream. She touched the worn notebook where she'd written Universidad de Medicina Veterinaria in careful letters. "Sorry, Mama," she whispered. "This can't wait." The next morning, Elena rode the community bus into town. At the second-hand bookstore, she found what she was looking for, a worn copy of Equine Medicine and Behavior, its cover faded, but its pages intact. It cost her 23 precious dollars. "You in school, honey?" asked the elderly woman at the register. "Someday," Elena replied, holding the book like a talisman. That night, Elena returned to Fury's stall, moving even more cautiously than before. She sat a few feet closer than she had the previous night, the book balanced on her knees. The Mustang paced nervously, but with less frantic energy than before. His sides heaved with exhaustion from another day of Buck's training. "I brought something," Elena said softly in Spanish. "Maybe we can learn together." She opened the book and began reading aloud, her voice gentle in the darkness. She translated passages into Spanish as she went, explaining the anatomical terms and behavioral concepts as if Fury were a student rather than a frightened animal. "It says here that horses have incredible memories," she told him, glancing up. "You never forget, do you? But it also says you can learn to trust again, like I'm trying to." Fury had stopped pacing. He stood at the back of his stall, ears flicking toward the sound of her voice, then away, as if unsure whether to listen or flee. For 5 nights, Elena continued this ritual. She worked during the day, head down, invisible as always, while secretly observing Buck's brutal methods. At night, she returned with her book, sitting a few inches closer each time, reading and talking to Fury about her own life. "My mother died crossing the desert when I was 12, she told him on the 4th night, her voice catching. "The coyotes, the human smugglers, not the animals. They left us when she got sick. Said we'd slow the group down." Fury had begun standing at the front of his stall when she read, still alert but less defensive. He seemed to recognize her voice now, his ears consistently turned toward her. On the 6th day, a commotion near the main house drew Elena's attention. A sleek silver Range Rover had arrived, and from it emerged a boy of about 12, his clothes expensive, his bearing entitled. Harrison Montgomery greeted him with a stiff pat on the shoulder. "Tyler, good to see you, son. Come see what I've got for you." Elena edged closer, pretending to sweep the breezeway. "This magnificent animal," Montgomery was saying, gesturing toward Fury's isolation area, "will be yours to ride in the Prescott Junior Rodeo. Imagine the impression you'll make on that black devil." The boy, Tyler, approached the stall cautiously. "He looks mean, Dad." "Not mean. Spirited. Buck will have him ready in 2 weeks. I've moved up the deadline." Elena felt her stomach drop. 2 weeks? Buck's methods were already too harsh. Under pressure, they would become truly brutal. That afternoon confirmed her fears. Buck doubled his efforts, using spurs that left bloody streaks on Fury's sides. The Mustang fought back with increasing desperation, nearly crushing one handler against the corral fence. "He's getting more dangerous," Buck complained to Montgomery. "Might need to be sedated before the rodeo." "Whatever it takes," Montgomery replied dismissively. "My son rides him in Prescott, or he goes to the slaughterhouse." When Elena slipped into the barn that night, she found Fury in worse condition than ever. He stood trembling in the corner of his stall, blood trickling from new wounds on his flanks. His magnificent coat was dull with sweat and fear. Elena moved closer than she ever had before, sitting just outside his stall. "They don't understand," she whispered, fighting back tears. "You're not mean. You're not bad. You're just scared and hurt." She opened her book, but couldn't focus on reading. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small jar of ointment she'd purchased with her dwindling savings. "This might help," she said, showing him the jar. "But you'd have to let me close." Fury's nostrils flared at the medicinal smell. He snorted and pawed the ground but didn't retreat further into his stall. Elena began singing softly, the same lullaby as before. Minute by minute, she inched closer to the stall door, continuing to sing. Her heart hammered in her chest. One kick from those powerful hooves could shatter bones. "Por favor, déjame ayudarte," she pleaded. "Please, let me help you." She reached the stall door and slowly, carefully slid her hand through the bars, palm up, empty. Fury's breathing quickened. He took a step forward, then back, his eyes never leaving her hand. For 10 long minutes, they remained in this standoff. Elena's hand extended, Fury watching from his corner. Then gradually, the Mustang took one step forward, then another. His nostrils expanded as he caught her scent. When his muzzle finally came within inches of her fingers, Elena held her breath. The touch, when it came, was like electricity. Soft velvet nostrils brushing her palm for just an instant before Fury retreated. "It's okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. That was brave. So brave. Elena returned to her spot outside the stall, her hand still tingling from the brief contact. She didn't attempt to touch him again that night, sensing the enormity of what had just transpired. Instead, she continued reading from her book, her voice steadier now, filled with new hope. The next morning, Elena arrived early as usual. As she walked past the feed room, she overheard Buck speaking to Montgomery. "That wild devil nearly took my arm off yesterday. 2 more weeks ain't enough." "I don't care if it kills you, Buck. Tyler rides that horse at Prescott. Period." Elena worked mechanically through her morning chores, her mind racing. 2 weeks wasn't enough time for Fury to heal, let alone build trust. And if he failed to submit to Montgomery's timeline. At lunch, she counted her remaining savings, barely enough for next month's share of the trailer rent. Her veterinary school fund was now almost depleted. The dream seemed further away than ever. That evening, Elena approached Fury's stall with an apple hidden in her pocket. The Mustang seemed to be waiting for her, standing alert, but not panicked at the front of his stall. "I brought you something," she said, slowly revealing the fruit on her open palm. Fury's ears pricked forward. He stretched his neck, nostrils working as he caught the sweet scent. Elena held perfectly still, arm extended through the bars. The seconds stretched into minutes as the Mustang considered her offering. Then, with delicate precision that belied his size and power, Fury took the apple from her hand. His lips brushed her palm, gentle as a whisper as he accepted the gift. Elena felt tears welling in her eyes. "No todos somos iguales," she whispered. "We are not all the same. Te lo prometo. I promise you." As Fury crunched the apple, Elena dared to reach up with her other hand. The Mustang flinched, but didn't retreat, allowing her fingers to barely graze the white star between his eyes. The touch lasted only a moment, but it felt like a miracle. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elena arrived at the ranch with renewed determination, her mind filled with the memory of Fury's trust. She moved through her morning chores quickly, eager for any opportunity to check on the Mustang. As she approached the feed room, Elena heard raised voices. She slowed, then stopped outside the partially open door. "Don't care about your methods, just get results," Montgomery was saying. "Sir, with all due respect, someone's been interfering with the horse," Buck replied. "He's different in the mornings, less reactive. Someone's been in there at night." Elena's blood ran cold. She backed away silently, heart pounding. If they discovered her nighttime visits, she'd lose not just her job, but any chance of helping Fury. For the rest of the day, Elena felt Buck's suspicious gaze following her. She kept her head down, moving through her tasks with practiced invisibility. When evening finally came, she debated whether to risk another visit to Fury. The thought of the Mustang waiting for her, perhaps even expecting her now, made the decision easy. That night, Elena approached the barn with extra caution, scanning for any sign of surveillance. The ranch seemed quiet, but her nerves remained on edge as she slipped inside. Fury nickered softly when she appeared, a sound so different from his previous fearful snorts that Elena stopped in surprise. "You remember me?" she whispered, approaching the stall. The Mustang came forward without hesitation, his ears pricked toward her. Elena extended her hand slowly. This time, Fury moved directly to her touch, allowing her to stroke his muzzle. "Look at you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "So brave." She stayed longer than usual, reading from her veterinary book while maintaining gentle contact through the bars. As the night deepened, Elena reluctantly prepared to leave. She had early shift tomorrow, and needed at least a few hours of sleep. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, gathering her book. As she turned to go, Fury did something unexpected. He followed her movement, walking the length of his stall as she moved toward the door, as if reluctant to see her leave. When she paused at the barn entrance for one last look, the Mustang stood watching her, his posture alert but no longer fearful. The next morning, as Elena approached the feed room with a wheelbarrow full of soiled bedding, she froze at the sight before her. Harrison Montgomery stood in Fury's stall, watching in obvious surprise as the Mustang, who had attempted to attack everyone else who entered his space, remained cautiously at the back of the stall rather than charging. Buck stood nearby, face dark with suspicion. "See what I mean, sir? Something's changed." Montgomery turned as Elena tried to slip past unnoticed. "You, girl, stop right there." Elena halted, keeping her eyes lowered. "Yes, sir. What's your name?" "Elena Ramirez, sir." Montgomery studied her for a long moment. "Have you been near this horse?" Elena hesitated, weighing her options. Before she could answer, Buck cut in. "She's just a stall cleaner, Mr. Montgomery. Barely speaks English." Montgomery ignored him, his gaze calculating as he looked between Elena and the unusually calm Mustang. "I asked you a question, Miss Ramirez." Elena lifted her chin slightly. "I clean his stall, sir, like all the others." A tense silence followed. Finally, Montgomery stepped out of the stall, closing the door behind him. His expression had shifted from anger to speculation. "Buck tells me someone's been working with this horse at night, that someone is interfering with his training methods." Elena remained silent, heart pounding. A thin smile spread across Montgomery's face. "Tell you what, Miss Ramirez, if you can get my son on that horse in 30 days, he's yours. Otherwise, you and your father lose your jobs, and the horse goes to slaughter." Buck snorted derisively. "Sir, you can't be serious. She's just a what, Buck?" Montgomery raised an eyebrow. "The little illiterate Mexican thinks she knows more than professional trainers. Let's see what she can do." As they walked away, Buck's laughter echoing off the barn walls, Manuel emerged from the shadow of a stall. The elderly stable manager had witnessed the entire exchange, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mi hija," he said softly, approaching Elena. "That man is not to be trusted." Elena nodded, still watching Fury. The Mustang stood at the front of his stall, ears forward, eyes fixed on her as if understanding the stakes of what had just transpired. "I know, Manuel," she replied, "but what choice do I have?" The old man studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Fury. His expression softened with recognition. "You have the gift, don't you?" he asked quietly. "My grandmother had it too. The horses spoke to her." Elena shook her head. "They don't speak to me. We just understand each other." Manuel smiled gently. "That, mi hija, is exactly what speaking is." The following morning, when Elena arrived to clean Fury's stall, she found a small bag hanging on the gate. Inside were fresh carrots, a soft brush, and a note in Manuel's careful handwriting. "Sunday, bring him your heart. We will bring the rest." Manuel's words lingered in Elena's mind as she moved through her tasks that day. The gift, he had called it. Not a skill to be learned, but something innate, something passed down through generations, perhaps even from her mother. The thought warmed her like a small flame in the darkness of her uncertainty. By mid-afternoon, the heat had become oppressive. Elena was spreading fresh bedding in the training barn when the main doors swung open, startling her. Harrison Montgomery strode in, his expensive boots leaving precise imprints in the dust. Behind him trailed Tyler, his 12-year-old son, looking uncomfortable in pristine riding clothes that had clearly never seen actual use. "There she is," Montgomery said, pointing at Elena as if she were an exhibit. "The girl who thinks she can tame Fury." Elena straightened, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I never said I could tame him, sir." Montgomery raised an eyebrow. "No? Then what exactly are you doing with my horse at night? Heat rose in Elena's cheeks. I'm getting to know him. A dismissive laugh escaped Montgomery's lips. Getting to know him? He's not a person at a cocktail party, girl. He's $100,000 of investment that needs to be broken before the Prescott Rodeo. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Elena's eyes. The boy seemed smaller in his father's shadow. His shoulders hunched slightly as if to make himself less visible. Come, Montgomery commanded, turning toward the isolation barn. Show us this miracle connection you supposedly have. Elena's heart raced as she followed them. She had never worked with Fury with an audience, let alone one so hostile. The Mustang would sense the tension immediately. Buck Thornton was already at Fury's stall, smirking as they approached. Ready for the show, sir? Montgomery nodded curtly. Miss Ramirez here believes she can succeed where professional trainers have failed. Elena stepped forward, acutely aware of every eye upon her. Through the bars, she could see Fury standing tense at the back of his stall, nostrils flared at the presence of so many humans. He won't perform on command, she said quietly. That's not how trust works. Buck snorted. Trust? It's a wild animal, not your boyfriend. Montgomery checked his watch impatiently. You have until the Prescott Rodeo, 28 days now, to get my son safely on that horse. That was our agreement. Elena turned to face him directly. That's not enough time. What he needs is irrelevant. Montgomery cut in. Results are what matter in this world, Miss Ramirez. Perhaps that's a lesson your people could benefit from learning. The casual cruelty of his words stung, but Elena kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse, lived worse. May I have some time with him now? She asked, refusing to be baited. Alone. By all means. Montgomery gestured grandly. Buck, stay and observe. I want a full report. As Montgomery led his son away, Buck leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The clock's ticking, pequeña. Montgomery doesn't make idle threats. Elena approached Fury's stall slowly, trying to ignore Buck's presence. The Mustang remained at the far wall, eyes alert, body tense. It's okay, she said softly in Spanish. I know there are too many people. I know you're confused. Buck shifted impatiently. English, girl. This is America. Elena continued in Spanish, her voice a gentle stream that gradually drew Fury's attention. His ears flickered toward her, though his body remained tense. She reached into her pocket, producing a small apple she'd saved from lunch. Holding it flat on her palm, she extended her arm through the bars. Come on, Buck taunted. Show me this magic connection. Minutes passed. Fury didn't move. Elena remained perfectly still, her arm extended, speaking in soft, melodic Spanish. Sweat trickled down her back, but she didn't waver. Buck checked his watch theatrically. 15 minutes of nothing. Very impressive. Just as he pushed himself off the wall to leave, Fury took a single step forward. Then another. His movement was hesitant, ears alternating between Elena and Buck. Elena held her breath as the Mustang approached, his footfalls nearly silent on the straw. When Fury finally took the apple from her hand, Buck's derisive expression faltered momentarily. Congratulations, he recovered quickly. You fed a horse. Revolutionary. He strode out, leaving Elena alone with Fury. Once Buck's footsteps faded, the Mustang relaxed visibly, moving closer to the bars. Elena reached through cautiously, stroking his sleek neck. Don't mind him, she whispered. Men like that fear what they don't understand. That evening, Elena found Manuel waiting for her by the service entrance as her shift ended. Sunday, he reminded her, pressing a piece of paper into her hand. My family comes to the ranch on our day off. We can help. Elena looked at the paper, directions to Manuel's family gathering spot on the ranch property. Thank you, but I don't want to impose on your family time. Manuel's weathered face creased in a smile. Mijija, some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. Even Jesus had disciples. Sunday arrived clear and cool. Elena walked to Diamond Creek earlier than usual, her stomach knotted with anticipation. She found Manuel and his family set up near a copse of cottonwood trees within sight of the isolation barn. A colorful blanket had been spread on the ground, laden with containers of food. Nearby, 3 men tuned guitars while children played tag between the trees. Manuel waved her over. "Elena, come meet my family." For the next hour, Elena was introduced to what seemed like an endless stream of relatives. Manuel's wife, Maria, their 4 adult children with spouses, and at least a dozen grandchildren of various ages. They welcomed her without question, pressing food into her hands, asking about her aunt, her hometown in Mexico. "Manuel says you have the gift," Maria said, her English heavily accented but clear. "My mother had it too." Elena shook her head modestly. "I just talked to him. Anyone could." Maria patted her hand. "No, mi hija. Not anyone." As the family ate and the musicians began to play, Elena excused herself to check on Fury. The Mustang was alert, ears pricked toward the music drifting from the gathering. When he saw Elena, he approached the stall door immediately. "I brought friends today," she told him, stroking his muzzle. "Is that okay?" Gradually, throughout the afternoon, Manuel's family members drifted over in small groups. They didn't crowd the stall or make sudden movements. They simply stood at a respectful distance, some singing softly along with the guitarists who had repositioned themselves under a tree near the barn. Fury watched with cautious interest. When Maria approached with a handful of carrots, Elena demonstrated how to offer them flat-palmed. The elderly woman's face lit up when the Mustang delicately accepted her offering. "He is gentle inside," Maria observed. "Just afraid." By late afternoon, something remarkable had happened. The area around Fury's stall had transformed into an extension of the family gathering. Children sat in the shade drawing pictures of the black horse. The guitarists played traditional songs, their music filling the space with warmth. Elena worked with Fury throughout, teaching him to accept touch on different parts of his body, speaking to him constantly in a mixture of English and Spanish. What amazed her most was how the Mustang responded to the music. Certain melodies seemed to calm him instantly, his eyes half closing in what looked remarkably like pleasure. "The music reminds him of something," Manuel's oldest son, Rafael, suggested. He was a mechanic in Phoenix who had driven 2 hours to join the family gathering. "Maybe the rhythm is like hoofbeats of his herd." As the sun began to set, the family packed up their things. Before leaving, Rafael examined the hinges on Fury's stall door. "These are rusted," he observed. "Could break any time. Dangerous for the horse, dangerous for you." The following Sunday, Rafael returned with new hinges and tools. While Elena worked with Fury, keeping him calm, Rafael quietly replaced the failing hardware. An elderly aunt brought a pouch of herbs, showing Elena how to make a salve for the wounds still healing on Fury's flanks. "My grandmother was a curandera," she explained. "This is her recipe." Word spread through the local Latino community. Each Sunday, the gathering grew slightly larger. A teenager who worked at the local tack shop brought a softer halter for Fury, explaining it would put less pressure on his sensitive pole. A grandmother brought special homemade treats with ingredients known to soothe equine digestive systems. The children's drawings multiplied, taped carefully to the barn wall near Fury's stall. The Mustang seemed to study them, his intelligent eyes taking in the colorful renditions of himself. One little girl had drawn him with wings. "He flew from the mountains," she told Elena seriously. "That's why they had to catch him. Angels aren't supposed to be on Earth." During the week, Elena continued her nighttime visits, reading to Fury from her veterinary book, singing softly, gradually introducing him to gentle pressure on different parts of his body. His progress was not linear. Some days he accepted her touch readily. Other days he retreated to the back of his stall, unwilling to approach. "It's okay," she would tell him on the difficult days. Healing isn't a straight line. 2 weeks into their agreement, Harrison Montgomery appeared at the isolation barn, Tyler trailing behind him. Elena was demonstrating to Manuel's wife how Fury now accepted a soft rope around his neck without panicking. "Impressive parlor trick," Montgomery commented, startling them both. "But my son needs to ride him," not pet him. Elena removed the rope carefully before turning to face Montgomery. He's not ready for that. Perhaps you're not ready, Montgomery countered. Perhaps this task is beyond your capabilities after all. Before Elena could respond, the Mustang did something unexpected. He moved to the front of the stall, positioning himself between Elena and Montgomery. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakably protective. Buck, who had followed Montgomery into the barn, noticed immediately. Look at that. The horse is defending her. Montgomery's eyes narrowed. Or he's finally showing some spirit. Buck, double the training sessions starting tomorrow. We're losing valuable time with these folksy methods. That night, Elena stayed later than usual, troubled by Montgomery's interference. Fury seemed to sense her distress, staying close to the stall door, occasionally nudging her hand with his muzzle. "What happens if we fail?" she asked him softly. "Where would you go?" "Where would I go?" The Mustang had no answers, only his steady presence in the darkness. The next morning, Elena arrived to find Buck already working with Fury in the round pen. His methods were harsher than before. Loud noises, aggressive movements, a whip cracked repeatedly near the horse's legs. Fury raced around the perimeter, eyes wild with renewed fear. "What are you doing?" Elena cried, rushing to the fence. "You're undoing all our progress." Buck turned to her, his expression triumphant. "Montgomery's orders. Real training, not your whispers and songs." Elena watched helplessly as Fury retreated into himself, the trust they'd built eroding visibly with each crack of the whip. When Buck finally released the Mustang back into his stall, the animal was trembling, sweat darkening his black coat. That evening, Elena arrived at the isolation barn to find Buck standing by Fury's stall, blocking her path. "No more midnight visits," he said flatly. "Montgomery wants results, not sentiment." "Please," Elena implored. "You're hurting him for no reason." Buck stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Listen, you're contaminating this horse with your sentimental nonsense. A wild animal needs to know who's boss. That's how the world works." As he spoke, his finger jabbed at Elena's shoulder, pushing her back. Before she could respond, a loud crash came from the stall. Fury had lunged at the bars, teeth bared, a warning neigh cutting through the air. Buck jumped back, startled by the Mustang's sudden aggression. Fury remained at the front of the stall, ears pinned flat, eyes fixed on Buck with unmistakable intent. He wasn't retreating in fear as he had with other handlers. He was standing his ground, positioning himself between Buck and Elena. "See?" Buck recovered, though he kept his distance. "That's the problem with these wild ones. Unpredictable, dangerous." But Elena saw something different. Fury wasn't just reacting in fear or aggression. He had moved deliberately to place himself between her and perceived danger. The Mustang had issued a clear warning, protecting her as surely as any loyal domestic horse might defend its trusted handler. Buck backed away, his expression darkening. "Montgomery will hear about this," he threatened. But the effect was diminished by his obvious unwillingness to approach the stall again. When Buck confronted Elena aggressively, shouting that she was contaminating the horse with nonsense sentimentalism, Fury reacted instantaneously, not with fear, but placing himself protectively between Elena and the capataz, making clear with a threatening neigh that she was now under his protection, completely reversing the dynamic everyone believed immutable. The word about Elena's connection with Fury spread through Diamond Creek Ranch like wildfire after the incident with Buck. Ranch hands whispered in the bunkhouse about the Mexican girl who could calm the devil horse. Wealthy clients riding their pampered show horses stole glances toward the isolation barn. Even the kitchen staff had heard about the horse whisperer who cleaned stalls by day and worked miracles by night. Elena noticed the new attention immediately and hated it. Visibility was dangerous, for her immigration status, for her job, and now for Fury. She kept her head down even more than usual, focusing on her tasks with deliberate efficiency, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might ask questions. One morning, as Elena hauled feed to the main stables, she noticed an unfamiliar figure standing near Fury's stall. An elegant woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in academic settings. The woman watched Fury with studied interest, her notepad filled with careful observations. "Excuse me," Elena said cautiously, approaching with a feed bucket as pretext. "Can I help you?" The woman turned, her eyes sharp with intelligence behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I should be asking if I can help you," she replied with a hint of a smile. "I'm Sofia Mendoza, retired professor of animal behavior from the University of Arizona." Elena hesitated, caught between ingrained caution and curiosity. "What brings you here, Professor?" "I've been observing you for several weeks," Sofia answered directly. "What you're doing with that Mustang isn't magic. It's applied behavioral science and empathy working in concert. And it's remarkable." A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Elena sitting in her high school biology class, her teacher pulling her aside after a particularly impressive project on local wildlife. "You have a scientific mind, Elena," Mrs. Garcia had told her. "You should consider college." That evening, when she'd mentioned it to her father during one of his rare visits, he'd dismissed it with a wave. "Sueños imposibles," he'd said. Impossible dreams. The university was for people with papers, with money, with names that opened doors instead of closing them. "I just talked to him," Elena said, shrugging off the praise. "It's nothing special." Sofia's eyebrow arched. "I've spent 30 years studying animal-human interactions. What you've accomplished in weeks with a traumatized wild Mustang is something most professional trainers couldn't achieve in months, if ever." The professor reached into her leather messenger bag, extracting several folded papers. "These are application forms for scholarship programs specifically designed for first-generation students interested in veterinary science." Elena stared at the papers, then glanced around nervously. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't have the right documentation." Sofia nodded knowingly. "These particular programs have provisions for undocumented students with academic potential. The path isn't easy, but it exists." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the forms, tucking them quickly into her pocket before anyone could see. "Why would you help me?" "Because talent shouldn't be wasted," Sofia replied simply, "and because that horse trusts you for a reason." The following day, Elena arrived to find Buck deliberately agitating Fury before her scheduled session. The capataz had reverted to his harshest methods, slapping a whip against the sides of the stall, making loud, sudden noises, depriving the Mustang of water since dawn. "What are you doing?" Elena demanded, her protective instinct overriding caution. Buck turned with exaggerated slowness. "Preparing him for your little session. Montgomery pays me to get results, not to watch a horse take a siesta while you sing lullabies." By the time Buck left, Fury was in a state of agitation that erased days of progress. The Mustang paced his stall, refusing Elena's touch, his eyes showing the whites that indicated extreme stress. Elena sat on her usual hay bale, heart heavy with setbacks. "It's okay," she told him softly. "We start again. Always start again." Over the following days, Elena began experimenting with different music, noticing how Fury responded to various sounds. Manuel's grandson, Miguel, brought his portable speaker to Sunday gatherings, playing everything from traditional corridos to classical guitar pieces. "Look," Elena pointed out as the opening notes of a Paco de Lucia flamenco piece filled the air. Fury's ears had flattened instantly, his body tensing. When they switched to a gentle mariachi melody, the change was immediate. His posture relaxed, ears forward with interest. "He associates certain guitar sounds with trauma," Elena theorized, watching the Mustang's reactions closely. "I think specific sounds were present during his capture or early handling." Miguel, a community college student studying psychology, nodded thoughtfully. "That's classical conditioning. Like Pavlov's dogs, but negative. Certain music triggers his trauma response." Each discovery revealed more layers of Fury's complex psychology. Elena began mapping these responses in a notebook, which touches he accepted, which sounds soothed or frightened him, how weather changes affected his temperament. The Mustang wasn't simply wild or broken. He carried an intricate history written in his reactions, a tapestry of experiences that had shaped his understanding of humans. We're discovering his memories, Elena explained to Sophia during one of the professor's increasingly regular visits. Every flinch, every fear response tells us something about what happened to him before. One afternoon, Elena looked up from her work to find Tyler Montgomery standing awkwardly at the entrance to the isolation barn. The boy had been watching the Sunday gatherings from a distance but had never approached alone. Can I ask you something?" Tyler's voice carried the uncertain pitch of early adolescence. Elena nodded, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she exited Fury's stall. "Why does he let you touch him but tries to kill everyone else?" The question contained genuine curiosity rather than his father's usual skepticism. Elena considered her answer carefully. "I don't try to control him," she finally said. "I ask permission." Tyler's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "When Buck or your father approach Fury, they expect submission. They demand it. I just offer connection and let him choose." The boy processed this, glancing toward the Mustang who watched them warily from his stall. "Could you show me how to ask permission?" Elena spent the next hour demonstrating to Tyler how she approached Fury, the body language, the respect for boundaries, the patience of waiting for invitation rather than demanding compliance. The boy listened with unexpected intensity, his questions thoughtful. "You have to be honest with horses," Elena explained. "They read our emotions better than people do. If you're scared but pretending not to be, they know. If you're angry but hiding it, they still feel it." Tyler tried approaching the stall under Elena's guidance, but Fury retreated, still associating the boy with his father. The Mustang snorted, pawing the ground nervously. "He's not ready," Elena said gently, "and that's okay. Forcing never works." Tyler nodded, clearly disappointed but accepting. "My dad says force is the only language some creatures understand." "And what do you think?" Elena asked. The boy looked thoughtful. I think Dad's wrong about a lot of things." From the shadow of the main barn entrance, Harrison Montgomery observed the interaction between his son and Elena, his expression an unreadable mask of calculation and irritation. That evening, Elena received a message from Manuel. Montgomery had decreed new rules. She would only be allowed near Fury during her regular work hours, under supervision. No more evening sessions. No more unsupervised time with the Mustang. "He's afraid of your progress," Manuel told her quietly. "Men like him fear what they cannot control." The community responded with quiet resilience. That night, 3 pickup trucks parked along the perimeter of Diamond Creek Ranch, just outside the property line. From their open windows, the gentle mariachi melodies that Fury had responded to so positively drifted across the night air toward the isolation barn. The next evening, 5 vehicles lined the road. The night after, nearly a dozen, creating a chain of music that reached the Mustang even though Elena could not. Elena still worked with Fury during her allotted daytime hours, but progress slowed without their evening sessions. One afternoon, while grooming the Mustang's neck, she discovered something she hadn't noticed before. A small, puckered scar just beneath his mane, the kind made by an electric prod. "You were mistreated even before your capture, weren't you?" she whispered, tracing the scar gently. Fury lowered his head, pushing his muzzle against her chest in a gesture of trust that brought tears to her eyes. For several minutes, Elena ran her hands slowly down Fury's powerful neck, across his withers, along his back. The first time he had allowed such complete contact. The Mustang stood perfectly still, his breathing synchronized with hers in a moment of profound connection. The breakthrough came at a cost. That evening, Buck intercepted Elena as she left the ranch, grabbing her arm roughly in the shadows of the equipment shed. "I don't know what trick you're using, Mexican, but no half-breed savage is going to make me look incompetent in front of the Montgomerys," he hissed, his fingers digging into her flesh. "If that horse isn't broken my way in 2 weeks, maybe you'll find out what it's like to be deported in the middle of the night." Buck's threat echoed in Elena's ears as she walked home that night, the dusty road stretching before her like the uncertain future she faced. The weight of his words, the casual mention of deportation, the contempt in his voice, settled in her stomach like a stone. This wasn't just about Fury anymore. This was about her survival, her aunt's safety, the fragile life they'd managed to build. Dawn arrived with heavy clouds gathering on the horizon, unusual for Arizona this time of year. Elena felt the pressure building, both in the sky above and in the situation surrounding her. When she arrived at Diamond Creek, the tension was palpable. Workers moved with heightened vigilance, conversations hushed when she approached. "Buck's been talking to Montgomery all morning," Manuel whispered as they crossed paths near the feed room. "Something's brewing." By mid-morning, Elena discovered what that something was. Buck had implemented a new, intensive training protocol for Fury, sessions 3 times daily, using methods that made her stomach turn. She watched from behind a stack of hay bales as Buck entered the round pen with Fury, flanked by 2 other handlers. The Mustang circled nervously, his ears pinned back, eyes showing white. "Today we break his spirit once and for all," Buck announced, uncoiling a long whip. For the next hour, Elena witnessed systematic cruelty disguised as training. Buck drove Fury relentlessly around the pen, cutting him off whenever he tried to establish distance, forcing him into increasingly panicked circles. When the Mustang finally stopped, sides heaving, foam flecking his midnight coat, Buck approached with a saddle. The result was explosive. Fury reared, striking out with hooves that could shatter bone. The handlers retreated hastily, Buck cursing as he narrowly avoided being struck. "Lock him up," he spat. "No water until this afternoon. Let's see how cooperative he feels when he's thirsty." Elena waited until they left before approaching Fury's stall. The transformation was heartbreaking. The Mustang, who had recently allowed her to touch his entire body, now paced frantically, flinching at the slightest movement. When she spoke his name, he retreated to the far corner, trembling visibly. "What have they done to you?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Throughout the day, Elena attempted to undo the damage whenever she could snatch a few moments alone with Fury. But each time she made the slightest progress, Buck would return with his whips and ropes, erasing her gentle work with renewed fear. That evening, Elena created a small calendar in her notebook, counting the days left in Montgomery's challenge. 22 days remained, just over 3 weeks to rebuild what Buck was systematically destroying. The following morning brought more aggressive training sessions. Buck seemed determined to break Fury through sheer force, pushing the Mustang to the limits of his endurance. Twice, Elena saw the horse nearly collapse from exhaustion, only to be driven harder. When night fell, she slipped out of her aunt's trailer despite the new rules against visiting Fury after hours. The risk of being caught paled against the risk of losing all the trust they'd built. As she approached the isolation barn, Elena moved with heightened caution, aware that Buck might have arranged surveillance. The barn was eerily silent when she entered. No shifting of hooves, no soft nickering greeting. Elena's heart sank as she approached Fury's stall. The magnificent Mustang stood motionless in the corner, head lowered, the spark in his eyes dimmed to embers. "Fury," she called softly. He didn't respond, didn't even flick an ear in her direction. Elena sank onto her usual hay bale, devastation washing over her. This was worse than fear. This was the beginning of broken surrender, the shutting down that preceded complete submission. She had seen it before in other horses, that moment when their spirit collapsed under relentless pressure. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't give up." For nearly an hour, Elena simply sat in the silence, occasionally speaking softly in Spanish, reading from her veterinary book, though she wasn't sure Fury was listening. Eventually, she stood to leave, her heart heavier than it had ever been. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, though she wondered if it mattered anymore. The next morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual, hoping for a moment with Fury before Buck's first session. To her horror, she found the Mustang in even worse condition, a new cut across his flank, fresh blood dried on his midnight coat. "What happened?" she demanded when Manuel arrived. The old man's face was grim. "Buck came back last night. I heard the commotion from the bunkhouse. After I left, why would he..." Elena stopped, cold understanding dawning. He's sabotaging us deliberately. That evening, Elena stayed late cleaning stalls, waiting until everyone had left. When she finally approached Fury's stall, her heart nearly stopped. The Mustang stood in exactly the same position as the previous night, but something was different. His breathing was shallow, his magnificent body trembling slightly. "Fury?" she called softly, approaching the stall. "What's wrong?" When he finally turned toward her voice, Elena gasped. His eyes were glazed with pain, his movements stiff and unnatural. As he took a single step forward, he stumbled slightly, catching himself with obvious effort. "Oh no," she whispered, quickly entering the stall despite the risk. "What did he do to you?" Elena ran her hands gently over Fury's body, feeling for injuries. When she reached his left foreleg, the Mustang flinched visibly. Carefully examining the leg, she found swelling just above the fetlock. Not a break, but a severe sprain that Buck had deliberately ignored. Fury's injury required immediate attention. Using the limited knowledge from her veterinary book and the herbs left by Manuel's aunt, Elena created a poultice to reduce the swelling. As she worked, the Mustang stood unnaturally still, only the occasional tremor passing through his powerful frame. "I'm so sorry," she whispered repeatedly, tears falling freely now. "This is my fault. I should have protected you better." When the poultice was in place, Elena sat on the floor of the stall, her back against the wall, utterly defeated. All their progress, all the trust they'd built, destroyed by deliberate cruelty. Perhaps Montgomery had been right. Perhaps 30 days wasn't enough to overcome centuries of fear and pain. "I failed you," she whispered, drawing her knees to her chest. What happened next would stay with Elena forever. Fury, despite his pain, slowly turned to face her. With careful, deliberate movements, he lowered his proud head until his muzzle was level with her tear-streaked face. For a long moment, he simply breathed there, his warm exhalations stirring her hair. Then, with infinite gentleness, he touched his soft muzzle to her cheek, as if drying her tears. Elena froze, hardly daring to breathe. In all her years around horses, she had never experienced such a deliberate act of comfort from an animal, especially not from one who had every reason to distrust humans. "You still trust me," she whispered in wonder. From the doorway of the barn came a sharp intake of breath. Elena looked up to find Buck standing there, his face pale in the dim light, his expression shifting from triumph to something like fear as he witnessed the interaction between girl and horse. Buck retreated without a word, but Elena knew what he had seen had disturbed him deeply. The Mustang's gesture had challenged everything Buck believed about wild animals, that they were creatures to be dominated, that gentleness was weakness, that trust was irrelevant. The next morning, Elena arrived at the ranch to find Manuel waiting for her, his weathered face tight with concern. "Buck told Montgomery you were in the stall with Fury last night," he said without preamble. "They're saying you endangered yourself and the horse." Elena's stomach dropped. "Is Montgomery firing me?" "Not yet," Manuel replied. "But Buck has convinced him to install cameras around Fury's stall. No more night visits." The news hit Elena like a physical blow. Without those quiet evening sessions, how could she counter Buck's brutal methods? "There's something else," Manuel added, his voice dropping. "I saw Buck last night after he left the barn. He looked disturbed, like a man who has seen something that shakes his beliefs." Elena remembered the expression on Buck's face when he witnessed Fury's gentle gesture. "He saw something he can't explain with his worldview," she said quietly. That afternoon, Elena worked with renewed determination during her allotted time with Fury. The Mustang's injury had improved slightly with her treatment, but he still favored the leg. As she applied a fresh poultice, she noticed Buck watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. "He's starting to question his methods," Sophia observed, appearing beside Elena later that day. The professor had become a regular presence, documenting Elena's progress for what she called research purposes. though Elena suspected it was also to provide an educated witness to her methods. "It doesn't matter," Elena replied bitterly. "Montgomery won't listen. He just wants results, no matter the cost." "Don't be so sure," Sophia said thoughtfully. "I've seen the way he watches you work. There's curiosity there, beneath the arrogance." The following day brought an unexpected visitor to the isolation barn, Tyler Montgomery, without his father or Buck as escort. "Is it true you can touch him all over now?" the boy asked, eyes wide with genuine interest. "I could," Elena replied carefully, "before the intensive training started." Tyler looked troubled. "Dad says Buck's methods are necessary, that wild animals need to be broken before they're useful." Elena measured her words, aware that anything she said might be repeated to Harrison Montgomery. "What do you think happens to something when it's broken, Tyler?" The boy considered this. "It stops working right." "Exactly." Elena gestured toward Fury, who stood watching them cautiously from his stall. "Buck isn't training him. He's breaking him. And a broken horse isn't a partner. It's just a shell." As the days passed, Elena began to notice something concerning. The surveillance cameras Montgomery had installed were being used for more than just monitoring her visits. Buck was studying her methods, watching how she approached Fury, how she spoke to him, how she gradually built trust. Then, during his sessions, he would pervert these techniques, using her gentle approaches as opportunities to implement harsher methods when the Mustang's guard was down. "He's using my own methods against him," Elena realized with horror. "Fury won't know who to trust anymore." Desperate for a solution, Elena consulted with Manuel. The elderly stable manager listened thoughtfully before responding. "My nephew, Raphael's son, he studies computer science at the community college. Perhaps he could help us with those cameras." 2 days later, Manuel's grandnephew visited the ranch, ostensibly to help with Sunday preparations. While Elena distracted Buck with questions about an unrelated horse, the young man quickly installed a small camera of his own, hidden in the rafters overlooking Fury's stall. "It will record everything for 24 hours, he explained later, showing Elena how to access the feed on her phone. "If Buck is doing something he shouldn't, we'll have proof." That night, Elena checked the feed regularly, watching as Buck made his usual evening rounds. Nothing seemed amiss until just after midnight, when the feed showed Buck returning to the isolation barn alone, carrying something in his hand that Elena couldn't quite make out. The footage revealed Buck entering Fury's stall with what appeared to be a riding crop. For nearly 20 minutes, he systematically undid Elena's gentle work, using the crop whenever Fury approached the areas of the stall where Elena usually stood. The message to the intelligent Mustang was clear. Approaching the spot associated with Elena meant pain. Elena watched in horrified silence, tears streaming down her face. When Buck finally left, Fury stood trembling in the corner of his stall, his trust once again shattered. The following morning, Elena arrived at the ranch with the video saved to her phone, determination hardening her resolve. As she approached the main house to confront Montgomery, she noticed an unfamiliar figure standing near Fury's stall, a slender woman with elegant posture and expensively casual clothes. It took Elena a moment to recognize Diane Montgomery, Harrison's rarely seen wife. She had visited the ranch only once since Elena had worked there, moving through the property like a ghost, speaking to no one. Now she stood watching Fury with undisguised interest, her expression thoughtful. When she noticed Elena approaching, she didn't dismiss her as Harrison might have. "You're the girl who works with him," Diane stated, rather than asked. "I've heard about your methods." "Mrs. Montgomery," Elena acknowledged cautiously, unsure of this unexpected development. "I was a dressage champion before I married Harrison," Diane said, surprising Elena with this personal revelation. "Back when communication with the horse was still valued over domination." She turned to face Elena fully, something resolute in her gaze. "Harrison doesn't understand that horses are like people. Break trust once, it takes twice as long to rebuild it." When Elena showed her the video of Buck's nighttime sabotage, something flashed in Diane Montgomery's eyes. A spark of the competitive rider she had once been, perhaps. Or simply the indignation of someone who understood the bond between human and horse. "Show me everything," Diane said quietly. "Show me what he's destroying." That evening, as Elena prepared to leave the ranch, Buck intercepted her near the equipment shed, his face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "I don't know what you thought you'd accomplish with that little camera trick," he hissed, confirming Elena's suspicion that he'd discovered the device. "But you've signed your own deportation papers. No one makes a fool of Buck Thornton." He reached into his pocket, producing a syringe filled with amber liquid. "See this? After Montgomery's precious son fails to ride that devil horse at the demonstration next week, this will make sure the beast goes down for good. An unfortunate accident, dangerous Mustang, heart failure during training. Happens all the time with these wild ones." Buck's cruel smile widened. "Choose, Elena. The horse or your community." Elena stared at the syringe in Buck's hand, her blood running cold. The amber liquid caught the dying light of sunset, seeming to glow with menace. His threat hung in the air between them, the horse or her community, as if either choice was acceptable, as if losing either wouldn't shatter something essential inside her. "You wouldn't," she whispered, though she knew with sickening certainty that he would. Buck's smile widened. "Try me. One call to ICE about the undocumented workers your precious Sunday gatherings have been bringing to the ranch, and half your supporters disappear overnight." Elena's mind raced. She needed to show Montgomery the video of Buck's sabotage immediately, but would the wealthy rancher care? Would he believe her word over his trusted capataz? "I'll be watching you," Buck warned, pocketing the syringe. Every move. The next morning, Elena arrived at Diamond Creek with the weight of Buck's threat heavy on her shoulders. She had barely slept, her dreams haunted by the image of Fury collapsing, of families being torn apart in midnight raids. As she walked toward the main office, rehearsing what she would say to Montgomery, she spotted Tyler sitting alone on a bench near the rose garden, absently throwing pebbles at a water feature. "Is your father in?" she asked, stopping a respectful distance away. Tyler looked up, his young face troubled. "Office. He's mad about something." Taking a deep breath, Elena knocked on the polished oak door of Montgomery's office. His gruff enter did nothing to settle her nerves. Harrison Montgomery sat behind an imposing desk, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He didn't look up from his papers as Elena stood awkwardly just inside the doorway. "Mr. Montgomery," she began, "I need to show you something important about Buck and Fury. If this is about your gentle methods being superior to professional training, save it." Montgomery cut her off, finally glancing up. "Buck has kept this operation running smoothly for 15 years. You've been cleaning stalls for what, 6 months?" Elena stepped forward, placing her phone on his desk with the video queued up. "Please, just watch." Montgomery's irritation was evident, but he picked up the phone. As the footage played, showing Buck's deliberate sabotage, the crop striking Fury whenever the horse approached Elena's spot, his expression shifted from dismissive to concerned, then back to controlled neutrality. When the video ended, Montgomery placed the phone down carefully. "Buck has unorthodox methods sometimes, but he gets results." "He's sabotaging Fury deliberately," Elena insisted, her voice stronger than she expected. "He's not training him. He's traumatizing him to make me fail." Montgomery leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with calculating eyes. "What exactly do you want me to do, Miss Ramirez?" "Fire him," Elena said immediately, "or at least keep him away from Fury." A dry laugh escaped Montgomery's lips. "Fire my head trainer on the word of a stall cleaner, over some rough handling of a wild horse? That's not how business works." "Then at least give me more time with Fury," Elena pleaded, "without Buck's interference." Montgomery considered this, his fingers drumming on the polished desk. "Buck will be advised to adjust his methods," he finally conceded, though his tone suggested minimal consequences. "But he stays on the ranch. It's the best I can do." Elena recognized the phrase from their earlier conversation, a non-concession wrapped in the appearance of compromise. As she left the office, Disappointment settled heavy in her stomach. She had known deep down that Montgomery wouldn't side with her over Buck, but the confirmation still stung. She was halfway to the isolation barn when the sound of running footsteps made her turn. Tyler was sprinting toward her, his face flushed with excitement. "I heard everything," he admitted breathlessly. "I was listening at the door." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Your father wouldn't approve of that." "I don't care," Tyler replied with sudden vehemence. "What Buck is doing is wrong. I've been watching too. Fury was getting better with you, and then suddenly he wasn't. It didn't make sense until I saw your video." Before Elena could respond, Tyler continued, his words tumbling out in a rush of unexpected maturity. "Dad always sides with people like Buck, men who talk about getting results no matter who gets hurt. But I've been watching you work with Fury. You're not just being nice, you're being smart." Something warmed in Elena's chest at the boy's perceptiveness. Perhaps there was hope for the Montgomery legacy after all. "Your father made his decision," she said gently. Tyler's jaw set in a stubborn line reminiscent of his father. "Then I'll make mine. I'm telling everyone what Buck did, starting with my mother." True to his word, Tyler sought out Diane Montgomery that afternoon. Elena watched from a distance as the boy spoke animatedly to his mother near the main house, occasionally pointing toward the isolation barn. Diane's normally passive expression transformed as she listened, a spark of the competitive rider she had once been flickering to life. The next morning, Elena arrived to find Diane Montgomery already at Fury's stall, dressed not in her usual designer casual wear, but in practical riding clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, years seeming to have fallen away from her elegant face. "Before I married Harrison, I trained with Olympic dressage riders in Europe," Diane said without preamble. "I know a few things about building trust with difficult horses." For the next hour, Diane demonstrated techniques Elena had only read about in her veterinary book. Breathing exercises that calmed both human and horse, subtle body language cues that communicated intention without pressure. Fury responded cautiously at first, then with increasing interest as he sensed the woman's authentic connection to horses. "Harrison doesn't understand," Diane said as they worked side by side. "He views everything as a conquest, businesses, horses, people. But you can't conquer trust, you can only earn it." Over the following days, a remarkable alliance formed. Diane began visiting the ranch daily, working alongside Elena with Fury. Her presence provided a buffer against Buck's interference. He was reluctant to directly challenge the boss's wife, regardless of his feelings about her methods. Elena noticed Tyler watching their sessions from a distance, gradually moving closer day by day. The boy who had once announced his intention to ride Fury into the rodeo ring now observed with quiet fascination as the Mustang slowly rebuilt his trust in humans. One evening, as Elena prepared to leave, Diane approached with an unexpected request. "I'd like you to come to dinner at our house tomorrow. There's someone I want you to meet." The Montgomery residence was exactly as Elena had imagined, a sprawling southwestern mansion with tasteful luxury in every detail. She felt painfully out of place in her cleanest jeans and borrowed blouse as the housekeeper showed her to an airy sunroom where Diane waited with an unfamiliar man. "Elena, this is James Harrington," Diane introduced. "He's the director of the Native Equine Conservation Program at Arizona State University." The distinguished man with salt and pepper hair extended his hand. "Mrs. Montgomery tells me you have quite a gift with horses, particularly with traumatized animals." Over dinner, served in the sunroom rather than the formal dining room, a small mercy Elena appreciated, James explained his program's work rehabilitating rescued horses and training disadvantaged youth to work with them. "We're always looking for natural talents," he said, studying Elena with genuine interest. "People who understand that healing happens in relationship, not through domination." Elena felt a flicker of hope so powerful it almost hurt. "I want to study veterinary medicine," she admitted, "but without proper documentation." "There are pathways," James said carefully, "especially for someone with demonstrated talent. Sophia Mendoza is on our advisory board. She's mentioned your work several times." The conversation shifted when Harrison Montgomery joined them for coffee, his expression tightening slightly at finding Elena seated at his table. But even he listened with grudging interest as James outlined the success of rehabilitation programs over traditional braking methods. The economic advantages alone are significant, James explained, speaking Montgomery's language. Horses trained through trust-building methods have longer working lives, fewer injuries, and greater versatility. When Elena left that evening, something had shifted. A door cracked open to a future she had barely dared to imagine. The community support continued to grow in unexpected ways. When word spread that Montgomery had prohibited Elena's evening sessions with Fury, Manuel organized a schedule of community members parking their vehicles along the ranch perimeter at night, playing the music that had so calmed the Mustang. The soft melodies of traditional songs drifted through the darkness, reaching Fury in his isolation. "He hears them," Elena told Sophia during a daytime session. "Look how his ears turn toward the music. He remembers it brings safety." Even with the community support and Diane's alliance, progress remained frustratingly uneven. Some days, Fury accepted touch readily, even seeking Elena's contact. Other days, he retreated to the back of his stall, the shadow of Buck's cruelty evident in his wary eyes. "Healing isn't linear," Sophia reminded Elena during a particularly difficult session, "for any trauma survivor, human or animal." 2 weeks into their modified arrangement, Harrison Montgomery appeared at the isolation barn during one of Elena and Diane's sessions. He watched in silence as his wife demonstrated a gentle desensitization technique, her movements fluid with the muscle memory of her riding days. 2 weeks, he finally announced, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. "If my son can at least touch that animal without it trying to kill him, I'll give you a real job as assistant trainer. Otherwise, Fury goes to slaughter, and you to the border with an anonymous call to immigration." Montgomery's ultimatum echoed in Elena's mind as she walked back to the isolation barn. 2 weeks. The impossible deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon, threatening everything she had worked for. Fury's freedom, her own security, the community that had formed around them. That evening, Elena sat cross-legged on the floor of her aunt's trailer, surrounded by scraps of paper, old calendars, and her veterinary notebook. She sketched out a detailed timeline, a day-by-day plan for the remaining 14 days before Montgomery's deadline. "Necesitamos al menos 10 días de aproximación gradual antes de que Tyler pueda tocarlo," she muttered to herself, writing 10 days of gradual approach at the top of her plan. That would leave only 4 days for actual contact. Barely enough time if everything went perfectly. And nothing had gone perfectly so far. The next morning, Elena arrived at the ranch to find Sofia Mendoza waiting by the isolation barn, clutching a thick manila folder. "I've been doing some research," the professor said without preamble, "about Fury's capture." They moved inside the barn where Sofia spread several documents across a tack trunk: maps, government reports, photographs of helicopters driving terrified Mustangs across Nevada landscapes. "The Bureau of Land Management conducts legal gathers of wild horses," Sofia explained, pointing to official documents. "But they're regulated, monitored, documented. Fury's herd doesn't appear in any official records." Elena studied a map of Nevada's wild horse territories. "How did Montgomery get him then?" "That's what I've been investigating." Sophia pulled out several blurry photographs. These were taken by a wildlife photographer who witnessed an unauthorized roundup in this remote area. She indicated a circled region on the map. "Notice the helicopter markings? They've been deliberately obscured, but the photographer got just enough detail." Elena leaned closer, examining the grainy image. "You think Montgomery paid for an illegal capture?" "I know he did." Sophia's voice hardened as she produced a financial record. "My contact at the BLM found these payments from a shell company owned by Montgomery Oil to a private contractor known for questionable roundup practices." Elena felt sick as she studied the photographs again. Terrified horses driven at high speed, a dark stallion fighting desperately as he was separated from his herd. "This is Fury, isn't it?" she asked, pointing to the black horse rearing against a capture pen. "Almost certainly," Sophia confirmed. "The timing matches, and look here." She indicated a distinctive white star between the horse's eyes. That's him. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. Fury hadn't just been captured, he'd been stolen. His panic, his rage, his desperate resistance, all rooted in the violent separation from his family. His behavior makes even more sense now, Elena said quietly. He's not just afraid of humans. He's grieving. As Elena processed this revelation, she noticed a man with a weathered face and a press badge interviewing ranch staff near the main house. That's Jack Reeves from the Wickenburg Sun, Sophia explained, following Elena's gaze. He's been asking questions about Montgomery's new Mustang. Apparently, word of a miracle horse whisperer has reached town. Elena felt a flicker of anxiety. I don't need that kind of attention. Maybe you do, Sophia countered. Sunshine is the best disinfectant, as they say. The more people know about Fury's story, the harder it will be for Montgomery to dispose of him quietly. That afternoon, Elena focused on creating a systematic approach to introduce Tyler to Fury. She prepared a written schedule, breaking down each day into specific goals. First observation from a distance, then approaching the stall, eventually standing beside Elena, and finally attempting contact. We need to work with Fury's trauma, not against it, she explained to Tyler the following day. The boy had arrived for his first official session dressed in simpler clothes than his usual designer attire, worn jeans and a plain t-shirt that made him look more approachable, less like his father's son. What exactly happened to him? Tyler asked, watching Fury from a safe distance. Elena hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his father's illegal activities. He was separated from his family violently, she finally said. Imagine if someone suddenly tore you away from everything familiar, everyone you loved, and then expected you to trust them. Understanding dawned in Tyler's eyes. That's why he fights so hard. He's not fighting because he's mean, Elena confirmed. He's fighting because he's terrified and grieving. Over the next 3 days, Elena implemented her careful plan. Tyler would sit quietly outside Fury's stall while Elena worked with the Mustang, gradually decreasing the distance between them. Fury watched the boy warily, but without the panic he'd shown earlier. He's starting to see you as an individual, Elena explained, not just as a human threat. On the 4th day, Sophia brought a surprising visitor to their session, an elderly Hualapai elder named Thomas who specialized in traditional horse medicine. The Spanish brought horses to our lands, Thomas explained as he observed Fury from a respectful distance. But many of us believe the horse spirit was here long before, waiting to return. This one has old spirit in his eyes. The elder suggested incorporating storytelling into their sessions. Horses understand more than we think. They feel the truth in our words. That evening, Elena tried a new approach. Instead of focusing on touch or movement, she simply sat near Fury's stall and began telling him her own story, about crossing the desert with her mother, about the fear and grief that had shaped her life. I was 12 when we crossed, she said softly, watching as Fury's ears flicked toward her voice. The coyotes, the smugglers, not the animals, abandoned us when my mother got sick. Said we were slowing the group down. Fury moved closer to the stall door as she spoke, his dark eyes fixed on her face. We walked for 2 days without water. My mother collapsed on the 2nd night. Elena's voice caught. Her last words were a promise that I would become something beautiful. To her amazement, Fury reached his muzzle through the bars, gently nudging her shoulder as tears slid down her cheeks. The gesture was so deliberately comforting that Elena felt something break open inside her chest, a wound finally exposed to healing air. Sophia, who had been observing quietly, made a small note in her journal. He's responding to your emotional honesty, she explained later. Horses are incredibly sensitive to authentic emotion. They can tell the difference between performance and truth. The next day, Elena suggested that Tyler try the same approach. The boy looked skeptical. You want me to tell him my life story? It's not exactly interesting. Tell him something true, Elena encouraged. Something that matters to you. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. My dad says men don't show weakness. especially to animals. Elena watched Fury observing them from his stall. "It's not weakness," she countered. "It's connection. If you want him to trust you, you need to trust him first." After several minutes of awkward silence, Tyler began speaking in a low voice. "Everyone thinks having money makes everything easy," he said, not looking at Elena but addressing Fury directly. "But my dad's never home. When he is, he's on the phone or entertaining business people. Mom used to ride, but she stopped after they got married. No one really sees each other at our house." As Tyler continued his halting confession of loneliness amid privilege, Fury's behavior changed subtly. The Mustang's usual vigilance softened, his breathing deepened, and he moved closer to the front of the stall. "He's listening," Elena said softly, careful not to interrupt the moment forming between boy and horse. "The only reason Dad got you was to show off," Tyler admitted to Fury. "He doesn't care what you want or how you feel. I'm supposed to be the same way, a Montgomery. But I don't want to be like him." To everyone's astonishment, Fury stretched his neck toward Tyler, nostrils flaring as he caught the boy's scent. Though still separated by the stall bars, it was the closest the Mustang had voluntarily come to the boy. "He's beginning to see you as an individual," Elena explained, her voice warm with pride. "Not just as a threat." Over the next several days they continued this approach, authentic connection before physical contact. Tyler visited daily, sometimes reading aloud from books Elena suggested about horse behavior, sometimes simply sitting quietly and talking about his day. Jack Reeves, the local reporter, published a small article questioning the origin of Montgomery's prize Mustang, mentioning the BLM's interest in unregistered captures. The piece was cautiously worded but planted the first public seeds of doubt about Fury's acquisition. Elena kept careful notes on Fury's progress, documenting each small victory: the first time he accepted a rope near his head without flinching, the moment he allowed Tyler to stand beside Elena at the stall door, the day he voluntarily approached when they entered the isolation barn. "Every reaction tells us something about his past," Elena explained to the small group that had begun to gather for their sessions: Sophia, Diane, occasionally Manuel or other workers. "When he pins his ears at the sound of a helicopter overhead, that's memory. When he relaxes during certain songs but tenses during others, that's association." One afternoon, as rain drummed on the barn roof, Elena noticed Harrison Montgomery watching their session from the shadows of the doorway. She continued working, pretending not to see him, but felt a surge of satisfaction when Tyler demonstrated a breathing technique she had taught him, one that helped calm both human and horse. "Dad says we're running out of time," Tyler mentioned as they finished the session. "The rodeo's getting closer." Elena nodded, anxiety tightening her chest. Despite their progress, they were still days away from actual physical contact between Tyler and Fury. The Mustang trusted Elena now, approached Diane cautiously, but still maintained a safe distance from the boy. "We're close," she assured Tyler, though doubt gnawed at her confidence. "Just keep doing what you're doing." That evening, Sophia brought more troubling news. "Montgomery's been in contact with a buyer from Texas," she revealed, showing Elena an email forwarded by a contact in the equestrian community. "He's hedging his bets. If Fury isn't ready for the rodeo, he's planning to sell him anyway." Elena felt sick. "So either way, Fury loses." "Unless we can prove his capture was illegal," Sophia countered. "The BLM takes unauthorized roundups seriously, especially when endangered bloodlines are involved." The following morning, Elena arrived to find Tyler already at Fury's stall, his expression anxious. "Dad's arranged a demonstration for next week," he blurted. "Important people are coming. He expects me to ride Fury." Elena's heart sank. "That's too soon. We're making progress, but—" "I know," Tyler interrupted. "That's why I told him I won't do it." Surprised, Elena studied the boy's face. The timid child she'd first met had been replaced by someone with newfound conviction. "What did he say?" she asked. Tyler's chin lifted slightly. "He said I'd embarrass the Montgomery name. I told him I'd rather do that than hurt Fury." Pride swelled in Elena's chest. Whatever happened with Montgomery's deadline, this transformation in Tyler was already a victory. When Tyler had gone, Elena found herself alone with Fury. The Mustang approached the stall door without hesitation now, lowering his head for her touch. As she stroked his sleek neck, an idea began to form. "I think it's time you told us your story," she murmured. That afternoon, Elena gathered their growing circle of allies, Sophia, Diane, Manuel, Tyler, even Thomas the Hualapai elder, in the isolation barn. She had spread out Sophia's maps and photos of Nevada's wild horse territories. "Fury isn't just any Mustang," she began. "He's part of a specific herd with unique bloodlines. Sophia's research suggests his family group has lived in this remote valley for generations, largely untouched by previous roundups." As she spoke, Elena moved around Fury's stall, touching him in specific places: the white star between his eyes, a pattern of small scars on his shoulder, the distinctive feathering on his fetlocks. "These are markers of his bloodline," she explained. "His story isn't just about one horse, it's about preservation of heritage, something I think we all understand." When Tyler asked to try approaching Fury with this new understanding, something remarkable happened. The boy stood at the stall door, speaking softly about the Mustang's homeland, describing the valleys and mountains Sophia had shown in her photographs. For the first time, Fury extended his muzzle toward Tyler without retreating, chewing softly, a sign of relaxation that brought tears to Elena's eyes. When Tyler finally touched the white star between Fury's eyes, just a whisper of contact, barely a second long, Montgomery happened to be watching from the fence, his face unreadable as his son achieved the connection he had demanded, though not in the way he had envisioned. Rather than the triumphant look Elena expected, Montgomery's face hardened with calculated determination. She overheard him murmuring to Buck, "Prepare the papers for the Texas auction. If this horse isn't ready for the Prescott Rodeo, we'll at least recover our investment." Montgomery's murmured words to Buck sent a chill through Elena's spine. The Texas auction. All her work, all the progress, Fury's trust, Tyler's growth, meant nothing against the cold calculation of profit. She watched Montgomery walk away, his expensive boots leaving precise imprints in the dust, each step crushing her hopes a little more. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect Arizona day that belied the tension building at Diamond Creek Ranch. Elena arrived earlier than usual, finding Tyler already at Fury's stall. The boy's face glowed with excitement as he demonstrated his progress, standing calmly at the stall door while Fury approached cautiously, allowing the Mustang to sniff his outstretched hand without flinching. "He didn't pull away this time," Tyler exclaimed, his voice hushed with wonder. "And look, he's chewing. Sophia says that means he's processing, not just tolerating." Elena watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Fury's body language had indeed transformed. His head held lower, ears relaxed, the whites of his eyes no longer showing. The Mustang was displaying clear signs of growing trust, not just with Elena but now with Tyler as well. "We're making real progress," she agreed, careful to keep her voice steady despite the knowledge of Montgomery's auction plans. "But we need to be consistent. No rushing." Throughout the morning, Elena guided Tyler through their established routine: quiet talking, gentle movements, gradual proximity. By midday, they had achieved something remarkable. Tyler standing at the stall door with his arm extended through the bars, Fury gently lipping a carrot from his palm. "Dad would never believe this," Tyler whispered as the Mustang's velvet muzzle tickled his hand. As if summoned by his son's words, Harrison Montgomery appeared at the barn entrance, accompanied by an unfamiliar man in an expensive suit and snakeskin boots. "That's him," Montgomery said, gesturing toward Fury. 100% pure Spanish colonial bloodline, according to the seller. Worth every penny of the 100,000, even if he's proving difficult. The visitor, clearly the Texas buyer, stepped closer, studying Fury with calculating eyes. "Impressive animal. Shame about the temperament issues." "Nothing that can't be fixed with the right methods," Montgomery assured him. "Or the right drugs if necessary." Elena felt sick at the casual cruelty in his words. Before she could speak, Tyler stepped forward, positioning himself protectively near Fury's stall. "He doesn't have temperament issues," the boy said, his voice stronger than Elena had ever heard it. "He was traumatized during an illegal capture. We have evidence." Montgomery's face darkened. "Tyler, that's enough." "It's not enough," Tyler insisted. "Elena's been teaching me that horses remember everything. Every kindness, every cruelty. Fury isn't mean, he's hurt, and we're helping him heal." The Texas buyer raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. "Perhaps I should come back another time, Harrison." "No need," Montgomery replied smoothly. "My son has developed a sentimental attachment to the horse. Youthful enthusiasm, nothing more." After they departed, Elena turned to Tyler, concern etched on her face. "That was brave, but dangerous. Your father won't like being challenged publicly." Tyler's shoulders slumped. "I know. But I couldn't just stand there while they talked about Fury like he's just property." Later that afternoon, Jack Reeves from the Wickenburg Sun returned to the ranch, his weathered face set with determination as he approached Elena near the feed room. "I've been digging into your Mustang's background," he said without preamble. "BLM has no record of his capture or sale. That's highly unusual for a horse of his quality." Elena glanced around nervously. "I can't talk about that." "You don't have to," Jack replied, lowering his voice. "My sources at the Bureau are already investigating. Unauthorized roundups of protected herds carry serious penalties, especially when the captor is a high-profile businessman with political aspirations." The following morning, Elena discovered a notice posted on the ranch bulletin board, a special demonstration scheduled for the following week, where Tyler Montgomery would showcase his horsemanship by riding the legendary Black Mustang before an audience of regional equestrian elites. "He can't be serious," Diane Montgomery said, appearing beside Elena. "Fury's nowhere near ready to be ridden, let alone in front of a crowd." "It's a power play," Elena realized. Whether Tyler succeeds or fails, Montgomery wins, either with a conquered Mustang or the justification to sell Fury to the highest bidder. That evening, Elena stayed later than usual, meticulously documenting Fury's progress in her notebook. The Mustang watched her from his stall, his intelligent eyes following her movements as she wrote. In the weeks since their first encounter, his coat had regained its glossy sheen. The wounds from Buck's training had healed, and his posture had transformed from defensive tension to alert curiosity. "We've come so far," she told him, reaching through the bars to stroke his sleek neck. "But they're still trying to take your choices away." As darkness fell, Elena reluctantly prepared to leave. The night security guard would be making his rounds soon, and she couldn't risk being caught after hours. Just as she gathered her belongings, she heard voices approaching. Harsh whispers carried on the evening breeze. Quickly ducking behind a stack of hay bales, Elena watched as Buck entered the barn, accompanied by two unfamiliar men in dusty work clothes. "Montgomery wants him ready for transport immediately after the demonstration," Buck was saying. "Whether the kid rides him or not, this animal's headed to Texas." One of the men grunted skeptically. "What if he fails the vet check? That buyer won't take damaged goods." Buck produced a small bottle from his pocket, the same amber liquid Elena had seen in the syringe. "That's why we have insurance. Heart failure during transport. Happens all the time with these wild ones. Stress, you know." Elena's blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to sell Fury, they were prepared to kill him if the sale fell through. She needed evidence, something more concrete than overheard whispers. As the men continued discussing logistics, Elena slowly extracted her phone from her pocket, activating the video recording function. For nearly 20 minutes, she documented their conversation. Explicit mentions of the illegal capture, the falsified paperwork, Montgomery's knowledge of the entire operation. When Buck finally left with his companions, Elena remained hidden, her heart pounding, clutching the damning evidence in her trembling hands. The next morning, Elena arrived at the ranch with renewed determination. She needed allies, powerful ones, if she were to counter Montgomery's plans. She found Diane in the main barn, supervising the cleaning of her seldom-used riding tack. I need to show you something, Elena said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Diane's expression grew increasingly grave as she watched the video, her aristocratic features hardening with each damning statement. Harrison assured me his business dealings were all above board now, she said when the recording ended. He promised after the last scandal. This isn't just about illegal business, Elena emphasized. They're planning to kill Fury if the sale falls through. Something shifted in Diane's eyes, a resignation giving way to resolve. I've stood by silently for too many years, she said, her voice taking on a steely quality Elena hadn't heard before. Not this time. Throughout the day, Elena continued working with Fury and Tyler, their session more urgent now with the demonstration looming. The Mustang had begun allowing Tyler to touch his face and neck, though still with occasional hesitation. Progress was happening, but too slowly to meet Montgomery's artificial deadline. He senses something's wrong, Elena explained when Fury seemed particularly agitated that afternoon. Horses pick up on our emotions. He knows we're worried. As evening approached, Elena spotted Buck leading a group of ranch hands toward the isolation barn, their purposeful stride setting alarm bells ringing in her mind. She followed at a safe distance, watching as they entered Fury's space with ropes and restraints. "Mr. Montgomery wants him moved to the main arena tonight," Buck announced. "Needs to get accustomed to the space before the demonstration." Elena stepped forward. "Moving him now will undo weeks of progress. He needs consistency, familiar surroundings." Buck's face twisted with contempt. "Montgomery's orders, girl. Step aside." What followed was chaotic and heartbreaking. Despite Elena's protests, Buck and his men forced Fury from his stall, the Mustang fighting desperately against the unfamiliar handlers and surroundings. In the commotion, Elena found herself shoved roughly aside, falling hard against a support beam. "You're hurting him!" she cried, struggling to her feet. "Shut her up!" Buck ordered, and one of the handlers grabbed Elena's arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. "Let her go immediately," came a commanding voice from the barn entrance. Diane Montgomery stood framed in the doorway, her posture regal with anger. Behind her stood Jack Reeves, camera in hand, documenting the entire scene. Buck released Fury's lead rope in surprise, allowing the panicked Mustang to pull free. For a terrifying moment, Elena feared he would bolt, perhaps injuring himself or others in his fear. Instead, Fury circled the space once, then positioned himself near Elena, his body creating a barrier between her and Buck's men. "What the hell is going on here?" Harrison Montgomery demanded, striding into the barn with Tyler trailing behind him. "Preparing the horse as ordered, sir," Buck replied, though his confidence had visibly faltered. "By assaulting my employee?" Diane countered, moving to Elena's side. "By traumatizing the animal before the demonstration?" Harrison's gaze darted between his wife, the journalist with his camera, and the frightened Mustang now standing protectively near Elena. "This is a private ranch matter," he said tightly. "Mr. Reeves, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises." "I'm covering a legitimate news story," Jack replied calmly. "The Bureau of Land Management is very interested in Mr. Thornton's comments about Fury's capture." Buck's face drained of color. "What comments?" Elena held up her phone. "I recorded everything last night. The illegal roundup, the falsified paperwork, the plan to kill Fury if he doesn't pass the vet check for the Texas buyer." The silence that followed was deafening. Montgomery's calculating gaze shifted between Buck, Elena, and the phone in her hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "Buck, outside. Now." As they left, Montgomery turned back briefly. "This isn't over, Miss Ramirez. Not by a long shot." When they had gone, Elena approached Fury cautiously. The Mustang was trembling, his breathing rapid, but he hadn't reverted to the blind panic of his early days. Instead, he remained near Elena, seemingly drawing comfort from her presence, even amid the chaos. "You were protecting me," she whispered, stroking his heaving side. "After everything humans have done to you." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. her mind racing with possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. She had evidence of Montgomery's illegal activities, but he was a powerful man with resources she couldn't begin to match. If she used the recording, would it save Fury or merely accelerate his fate? Would it protect her community or expose them to greater risk? At dawn, she made her decision. Meeting Sophia and Jack at a small cafe in town, she transferred copies of both recordings to them. "If anything happens to me or Fury," she instructed, "release everything." When Elena arrived at the ranch later that morning, an atmosphere of tense anticipation hung in the air. Workers moved with heightened vigilance, conversations hushed when she approached. Even Manuel seemed unusually reserved, his weathered face tight with concern. "Buck's been fired," he informed her quietly. "Left in the night. Montgomery's telling everyone it's for unauthorized training methods, but..." He trailed off meaningfully. Before Elena could respond, she noticed a commotion near the main house. Harrison Montgomery was engaged in a heated argument with the Texas buyer, their voices carrying across the yard despite their obvious attempts at discretion. "The demonstration proceeds as planned," Montgomery insisted. "The horse will be ready." "I'm not interested in legal complications," the Texan replied. "If the BLM is investigating..." "I'll handle the BLM," Montgomery cut in. "Your concern is securing an exceptional specimen before prices rise." As the men moved inside, Elena felt a presence beside her. Tyler stood watching his father, his young face troubled but resolute. "He's still going to sell Fury, isn't he?" the boy asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I think so," Elena answered honestly. Tyler nodded slowly. "Then we need to be ready." The boy's quiet determination stirred something in Elena. Hope, perhaps, or renewed resolve. Together they walked toward the isolation barn where Fury had been returned after the previous night's chaos. The Mustang greeted them with a soft nicker, approaching the stall door without hesitation. As Elena watched Tyler gently stroke Fury's muzzle, she realized that whatever happened in the coming days, something profound had already been accomplished. The frightened, aggressive animal she'd first encountered had reconnected with his capacity to trust. The privileged, isolated boy had discovered his own strength and compassion. "We'll protect him," Tyler promised, as if reading her thoughts. "Somehow." Elena was about to respond when she heard footsteps approaching, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Harrison Montgomery appeared in the doorway, flanked by two security guards she didn't recognize. Behind them stood a representative from the Bureau of Land Management, his official jacket and clipboard marking him as government personnel. "Miss Ramirez," Montgomery said, his voice coldly formal, "I believe we need to discuss your employment status and certain accusations you've been making." While the dust settled, Harrison looked at everyone around him, his wife with incriminating evidence, the reporter with his recording, the BLM agent with a severe expression, his shocked son, and the wild Mustang protecting the young Mexican woman. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with contained anger. "You don't understand how the real world works. People like me don't lose. Never." The silence that followed Montgomery's declaration stretched like a wire about to snap. Elena stood her ground, one hand resting protectively on Fury's neck, feeling the rapid thrum of his pulse beneath her fingers. The Mustang's muscles quivered with tension, but he remained beside her, no longer the terrified animal who had once charged at any human approach. "Mr. Montgomery," the BLM representative stepped forward, his clipboard held like a shield. "Regardless of who wins or loses, I have a legal obligation to investigate allegations of unauthorized roundups of protected herds." Montgomery's confident smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Agent Daniels. Diamond Creek Ranch has nothing to hide. However, before we proceed with bureaucratic formalities, I'd like to propose a solution that benefits everyone." He turned toward the assembled group, his voice taking on the polished tone Elena recognized from his business dealings. "The demonstration will proceed as scheduled tomorrow. If the Mustang performs as expected, no harm done. If not," he spread his hands magnanimously, "I'll cooperate fully with any investigation while we determine the animal's future." "Dad, you can't..." Tyler began, but Montgomery silenced him with a sharp glance. My son has developed quite an attachment to this horse, Montgomery continued smoothly. His passion is commendable, if somewhat impractical. Tomorrow's demonstration will be an excellent learning experience. Agent Daniels looked uncomfortable but nodded. I'll be attending the demonstration officially. The Bureau has concerns about this animal's provenance. As the men moved away, discussing details, Diane approached Elena, her voice low and urgent. He's trying to save face. The demonstration gives him one last chance to prove the value of his investment before everything falls apart. Elena watched Montgomery's retreating back, understanding dawning. He needs to show Tyler riding Fury in front of witnesses. Whether it succeeds or fails, he controls the narrative. Exactly, Diane confirmed. Success validates his methods. Failure justifies disposal. Either way, he appears in control. Later that evening, the isolation barn transformed into an impromptu war council. Sophia, Manuel, Diane, Tyler, and several members of the Sunday gathering community huddled together, speaking in hushed voices as Fury watched curiously from his stall. Montgomery's backed into a corner, Sophia explained, spreading out papers on a hay bale. The BLM investigation, Jack's article, Diane's evidence, it's all closing in. This demonstration is his attempt to reframe the narrative before it all comes crashing down. But Fury isn't ready to be ridden, Elena insisted, glancing at the Mustang. Especially not in a high-pressure environment with an audience. We've built trust, but mounting is completely different. Manuel, who had remained silent until now, spoke with quiet certainty. Then don't do what they expect. All eyes turned to the elderly stable manager. What do you mean? Tyler asked. They expect domination, the human conquering the wild beast, Manuel explained. Show them something else instead. Show them partnership. As darkness fell across Diamond Creek Ranch, workers erected temporary bleachers around the main arena. Decorative bunting in the Montgomery corporate colors fluttered in the evening breeze. Elena watched from the shadows, her stomach knotting with anxiety. It looks like a circus, a voice observed beside her. Jack Reeves stood adjusting his camera, his weathered face grim. Montgomery's invited half the equestrian community in Arizona, plus local politicians and media. He's creating witnesses, Elena realized. People who'll see whatever version of events he wants them to see. Unless you show them something else, Jack countered, his eyes sharp with journalistic instinct. Something true. Elena spent the night in Fury's stall, sleeping fitfully on a bed of clean straw. The Mustang stood watch, occasionally lowering his muzzle to nudge her awake when nightmares made her whimper in her sleep. By dawn, she had formulated a plan. Risky, unconventional, but the only option that honored both Fury's dignity and their hard-won trust. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the barn slats, Sophia arrived with coffee and a worried expression. The arena's already filling up. Montgomery's gone all out. Food, drinks, a printed program. He's calling it The Taming of Fury, a Montgomery legacy event. Elena felt sick. He's turned it into entertainment. Which means everyone will be watching, Sophia pointed out, including the BLM, the press, and potential allies who might not even know they're allies yet. By mid-morning, the transformation of Diamond Creek Ranch was complete. What had been a working ranch now resembled a private rodeo ground, with Montgomery's oil company logos prominently displayed. Expensively dressed spectators filed into the bleachers, programs in hand, chattering excitedly about the savage Mustang they'd heard so much about. Elena remained in the isolation barn with Fury, brushing his gleaming coat with steady strokes while murmuring reassurances in Spanish. The Mustang's ears flicked back and forth, sensing the unusual activity, but he remained calm under her touch. No matter what happens today, she promised him, you won't be alone again. Tyler slipped into the barn, dressed not in the flashy Western gear his father had undoubtedly selected, but in simple jeans and a plain button-down shirt. Dad's looking for you, he told Elena. He wants to make sure we're on the same page about the demonstration. And what page is that? Elena asked, continuing to brush Fury. The one where I ride triumphantly on a fully broken Mustang, proving the Montgomery method works. Tyler's voice dripped with sarcasm. He's already talking about breeding Fury, creating a Montgomery Mustang bloodline. Elena's hand stilled on Fury's neck. He's still thinking about the future, even with the BLM investigating? Dad always thinks he'll win, Tyler said simply. He doesn't know how to consider any other outcome. At 11 o'clock, Harrison Montgomery himself appeared at the barn door, immaculate in a custom Western shirt bearing his company logo. "It's time," he announced without preamble. "The guests are waiting." Elena nodded, attaching a simple lead rope to Fury's halter, the lightest equipment the Mustang had learned to accept. No bit, no bridle, no saddle. Montgomery's eyes narrowed at the minimal gear. "Where's the rest of the tack?" he demanded. "This is what Fury is comfortable with," Elena replied evenly. "Anything more would be setting him up for failure." Montgomery's jaw tightened. "The program explicitly states that my son will be riding the Mustang." "And your son will make that decision when we're in the arena," Elena countered, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Unless you want to guarantee a disaster in front of all your guests." For a tense moment, Montgomery seemed ready to explode. Then, visibly recalculating, he forced a tight smile. "Very well. We'll proceed with your minimalist approach, for now." The walk to the main arena felt like a funeral procession to Elena. Fury moved beside her, his steps measured but alert, ears constantly swiveling toward the sounds of the crowd ahead. She could feel the tension building in his powerful body, the instinctive fear of confinement and exposure battling with his trust in her. "Tranquilo, mi valiente," she murmured. "Stay calm, my brave one." The arena entrance loomed before them. Beyond it, Elena could hear the announcement system crackling to life, Montgomery's voice booming with rehearsed charm as he welcomed his guests to this historic demonstration of the Montgomery method of natural horsemanship. Elena almost laughed at the irony. There had been nothing natural about Montgomery's approach until she had intervened. She glanced at Tyler, who stood pale but determined beside her. "Ready?" she asked softly. The boy nodded. "Let's show them what partnership really looks like." As they entered the arena, the crowd's murmurs rose to an expectant hush. Elena was momentarily blinded by the bright sunlight after the dim barn, but Fury's warm presence beside her kept her grounded. When her vision cleared, she saw the full extent of Montgomery's spectacle. Bleachers packed with spectators, a judge's table where several equestrian experts sat with clipboards, even a small orchestra playing gentle background music that someone had obviously researched as soothing to horses. In the center of it all stood Harrison Montgomery, microphone in hand, the consummate showman. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Fury, the last truly wild Mustang of the American West, and the young woman who has assisted in his preparation." The dismissive introduction wasn't lost on Elena, but she kept her focus on Fury, who had tensed at the sight of so many humans. His nostrils flared, eyes widening, but he didn't bolt, a testament to how far they'd come. "Today," Montgomery continued grandly, "my son Tyler will demonstrate the final stage of the Montgomery method by mounting and riding this once untamable stallion, proving that with the right approach, even the wildest spirit can be—" "Excuse me," Elena interrupted, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. "That's not what's happening today." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Montgomery's smile froze, his eyes flashing a warning. "What my father meant," Tyler stepped forward, taking the microphone, "is that today we'll be demonstrating what we've actually learned about Fury and about ourselves." Montgomery moved to reclaim control, but Diane smoothly intercepted him, her hand on his arm like a vice disguised as a loving touch. "Let them show what they've accomplished, Harrison," she said, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Isn't that the point of all this?" With all eyes upon them, Elena unclipped the lead rope from Fury's halter. The Mustang stood perfectly still, though she could feel his awareness of every exit, every potential threat. This was the moment of truth. Without restraint, would he choose to stay or flee? "Today we won't show domination," Elena announced, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "We'll show partnership. Not control, but respect. Tyler moved to stand beside her, his presence calm and centered in a way that belied his 12 years. "I've learned that horses don't need to be broken to be magnificent," he added, his young voice carrying surprising authority. As the audience watched in tense silence, Elena began to move slowly around the arena, not leading Fury but inviting him to follow. For 3 heartbeats, the Mustang remained still, visibly processing this unexpected freedom. Then, to audible gasps from the crowd, he chose to move with her, maintaining a perfect distance of 2 feet, his head lowered in relaxed attention. When Fury, free of any restraint, chose to remain at Elena and Tyler's side in the center of the arena, circling them protectively but never straying far, the BLM representative approached Harrison Montgomery, notepad in hand. "Mr. Montgomery, we need to discuss this animal's origin and several apparent federal violations immediately, unless you'd prefer this conversation to take place in my office, accompanied by your attorney." The sign at the entrance to what had once been Diamond Creek Ranch now read, "Free Spirits Sanctuary, where horses and humans heal each other." The elegant hand-painted wooden board had replaced the imposing wrought iron nameplate that had once announced Montgomery's domain. Elena paused to admire it as she drove through the gates in her used Honda Civic, university textbook stacked on the passenger seat beside her. 3 years had passed since that fateful demonstration day when the truth about Fury's capture had finally come to light. 3 years of transformation, of healing, of building something entirely new from the ashes of Harrison Montgomery's empire. Elena parked her car beneath a cottonwood tree and gathered her veterinary textbooks. At 22, she moved with a confidence that her 19-year-old self could hardly have imagined. Her dark hair was cut shorter now, practical for long hours of study and work, and her once cautious eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had found her place in the world. "Elena," a teenage voice called from the main arena. Tyler Montgomery, now 15 and impossibly taller, jogged toward her. No longer the timid boy trapped in his father's shadow, he had grown into a thoughtful young man with an easy smile. "How's Dr. Ramirez today?" he teased, reaching for her stack of books. Elena laughed. "Still 2 years away from that title, thank you very much. How's your student doing?" Tyler's face softened with pride. "Mia's making amazing progress. First time she's spoken more than 1 word at a time since the accident." They walked together toward the central arena, where a young girl with leg braces sat on a gentle Palomino mare. The child's therapist walked alongside, but it was clear from the girl's posture that she felt secure on the horse, perhaps more secure than she felt on the ground. "She said a whole sentence today," Tyler continued. "When Sunflower started walking, Mia said, 'I feel like I'm flying.' Her mom started crying." Elena squeezed his shoulder. The transformation of Diamond Creek from a showcase of wealth to a healing center had been Tyler's idea, proposed during the chaotic months after his father's arrest. Harrison Montgomery now faced multiple federal charges for fraud, tax evasion, and violations of wildlife protection laws. The legal proceedings had revealed a pattern of corruption that stretched back decades. Diane Montgomery, free from her husband's shadow, had emerged as a formidable businesswoman in her own right. She'd used her divorce settlement to establish the sanctuary, transforming the property into a rehabilitation center for traumatized horses and a therapeutic riding facility for children with special needs. "Mom's in the office with the Norwegian delegation," Tyler explained as they approached the main building. "They want to implement our program in Oslo." The administration building, once Harrison Montgomery's shrine to his own success, now housed a comfortable meeting space, classrooms, and a small research library. The walls displayed a chronological story of the sanctuary's evolution: newspaper clippings, photographs, letters from families whose lives had been changed. One wall featured a framed front page of the Wickenburg Sun with the headline, "Wild Horse Scandal Leads to Federal Investigation." Jack Reeves had won a regional journalism award for his coverage of the Montgomery case, bringing national attention to the plight of wild Mustangs. Elena scanned the visitor's schedule on the whiteboard. "Looks like we have the autism group coming at 2. "Sophia's handling that session," Tyler replied. She said to tell you she needs your observation notes from last week for her research paper. Professor Sofia Mendoza had become a regular presence at the sanctuary, conducting groundbreaking research on equine-assisted therapy for trauma survivors. Her partnership with Elena had resulted in 2 published papers already, with Elena listed as co-author, an unprecedented achievement for an undergraduate student. As they crossed the grounds toward the special enclosure where Fury and his small herd lived, Elena greeted the various staff members and volunteers. Manuel, now the official ranch manager, was instructing new volunteers on proper feed protocols. His extended family remained the heart of the Sunday gatherings, which had evolved into community celebrations open to all. The sanctuary's reputation had grown steadily, attracting visitors from across the country and beyond. What had begun as Elena's desperate attempt to save one horse had blossomed into a model program studied by equine specialists worldwide. "There he is," Tyler said softly as they approached the largest paddock. Fury stood at the highest point of his enclosure, his midnight coat gleaming in the morning sun. At 9 years old, he had matured into an even more magnificent animal, his wild heritage evident in his powerful build and watchful eyes. Below him, 5 other rescued Mustangs grazed peacefully, each with their own story of trauma and recovery. The black stallion spotted Elena immediately. His ears pricked forward, and he descended the small hill with measured steps, approaching the fence with the dignified bearing that had never diminished despite his years in human company. "Hello, handsome," Elena greeted him, extending her hand. Fury's velvet muzzle touched her palm in a gesture that still felt miraculous after everything they had endured together. "I never get tired of watching that," came a voice behind them. Diane Montgomery approached, elegant as always, but dressed practically in riding boots and jeans. "The moment he recognizes you, it's like watching someone greet their soulmate." Elena smiled. "How was the meeting with the Norwegians?" "Productive. They're impressed with our data on recovery rates." Diane's business acumen had proven invaluable in securing the sanctuary's future, though I think they were more moved by watching Miguel's session with the veterans this morning. Miguel, Manuel's grandson, had developed a specialized program for combat veterans suffering from PTSD. His intuitive understanding of both horses and trauma had created a healing space where hardened soldiers could safely process their experiences. "Did they see Esperanza's new foal?" Elena asked, referring to one of their rescued mares who had arrived pregnant. "First stop on the tour," Diane confirmed. "Nothing sells this program like new life emerging from rescued animals." As midday approached, Elena settled on a bench near Fury's enclosure to review her textbooks. Her scholarship to the veterinary medicine program at the University of Arizona had been hard-won, a combination of Sofia's advocacy, Elena's undeniable talent, and a special consideration for her extraordinary work with traumatized horses. Fury approached the fence nearby, standing in companionable silence as Elena studied. Their relationship had evolved into something beyond conventional understanding, neither fully wild nor fully domesticated, but a partnership based on mutual choice. In the early days of the sanctuary, many had expected Elena to complete Fury's training by riding him regularly. She had refused, insisting that his choice to remain unbridled was essential to his healing. Then, 6 months after the sanctuary opened, on a quiet morning with no witnesses, Fury had approached Elena in the round pen and lowered his body in a clear invitation. Their first ride had been on his terms. No saddle, no bridle, just trust and balance. Now they rode regularly across the sanctuary's expanded grounds, but always on the same terms. Fury chose when and how long, and Elena respected his boundaries without question. "Taking a study break?" Sofia asked, approaching with her ever-present research notebook. At 65, the professor remained tireless in her documentation of the sanctuary's methods. "Just finished reviewing equine pharmacology," Elena replied, closing her textbook. "I have a practical exam next week." Sofia settled beside her. "I've been meaning to tell you. The university committee approved our joint research proposal, Full funding for a 3-year study on the neurobiological effects of gentle training methods on previously traumatized horses. Elena's eyes widened. That's incredible. When do we start? Next month, which means you'll be earning research credits while you finish your degree. Sophia smiled. The committee was particularly impressed by your case documentation with Fury. As afternoon approached, Elena prepared for her special session with a new arrival, a mare rescued from an illegal slaughterhouse operation, so traumatized she wouldn't allow human touch. 3 weeks of patient work had yielded minimal progress, but Elena recognized the patterns of fear that she had first observed in Fury. You recognize yourself in her, don't you? Tyler asked, helping Elena prepare the quiet round pen with fresh bedding. Elena nodded. Trauma speaks its own language. I think that's why Fury and I connected. We understood each other's wounds without words. The therapeutic sessions with children began across the property, filling the sanctuary with gentle voices and occasional laughter. Elena watched as a young boy with autism who had never made eye contact with his therapists leaned forward to whisper something to his therapy horse. The animal's ears flicked forward, listening with an attention the child had never received from humans. That's the miracle of this place, observed Jack Reeves, who had arrived to photograph the sanctuary for a follow-up feature. Broken beings healing each other. As evening approached, Elena completed her notes on the new mare's progress and prepared for her own special ritual. Every evening at sunset, weather permitting, she and Fury took a ride across the expanded sanctuary grounds, 500 acres now after Diane had purchased the adjacent property. Fury waited by the gate, anticipating their time together. No halter, no rope, just the connection they had built over 3 years of mutual respect. Elena approached with an apple and the soft brush he preferred. "Ready for our ride, handsome?" she asked, stroking his gleaming neck. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Elena and Fury moved across the golden landscape. The Mustang chose their path as always, sometimes walking sedately, other times breaking into the ground-eating gallop that was his birthright. Elena moved with him instinctively, their bodies synchronized through countless hours of partnership. They crested a small hill overlooking the sanctuary. Below them, the buildings glowed amber in the fading light, and the other rescued Mustangs grazed peacefully in their enclosure. Beyond stood the mountains where Fury had been born, where his ancestors had run free for generations. Elena dismounted, standing beside Fury as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, cleaning stalls in the shadows, hiding her dreams in a tattered notebook. She thought about the terrified Mustang, fighting desperately against captivity, his spirit nearly broken by cruelty. "We made it," she whispered, pressing her cheek against his warm neck. As if in response, other Mustangs from the sanctuary joined them on the hilltop, a family rebuilt under the infinite Arizona sky, living proof that scars can become strength when met with understanding rather than judgment.